This is a review of Bring Me That Horizon, the making of Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, this book covers the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies, which means it's an excellent companion to the Pirates of the Caribbean art book, which also covered the first 3. However, while that book was very lavish and stood out in the world of art books, this book does not do the same thing for making of books. In fact, this book is sometimes hard to judge just because it sits in that kind of weird place of, say, a 3.5 to 4-star sort of book, which means that while it doesn't really do anything particularly great as a making of book, it still does enough things right to make it come out ahead of the sort of more 3-star mediocre books. So the first thing you'll notice is that this is a highly visual book. Tons and tons of photos, really big, high quality. And one really great thing is that even though this book does use quite a lot of stills from the actual movie, it uses far fewer than a lot of other similar books, and instead does offer up a ton of really great behind the scenes pictures. Jerry Bruckheimer, the producer of these films, and who also contributed the foreword to this book, when he's on the set for a lot of his movies, he likes to do a lot of personal photography, and so it was nice to see, I don't know, maybe about 20 of his personal photos included in the book, although they're not always necessarily strictly behind the scenes photos. Sometimes they have more of like a unit photographer sort of look, but it's stuff you won't see anywhere else, so that's really nice. And then there are a couple of concept and costume pieces of art in this book. However, I couldn't identify a single piece that was reproduced in this book that wasn't also in the art book. So no new art pieces in this one. So even though it is a very visual book and the visuals are very nice, the unfortunate thing is that this then means the text really feels like it takes sort of a backseat, which is something I don't necessarily like to see in making of books, especially when you've got one book that's on 3 very huge movies, and that strain was very apparent through a lot of the book. The actual contents of the book is all the sort of stuff you'd expect on, the characters, cast, sets, locations, the ships, costumes, all the sort of stuff you'd expect. But with so many images throughout the book, each area really only gets a couple of paragraphs, and a couple of paragraphs to talk about not just one movie, but 3, and not just 3 movies, but 3 very huge productions. The text falls back on something that I notice in a lot of making of books that try and do this approach, which is when you have to cover a lot of area for each area of production, what inevitably ends up happening is they take such a wide angle view of that entire area of production, and the information presented, the stuff you're reading, is just far too generalized, rather than having true depth and insight into how that specific movie was made. But again, I go back to the idea of this book falling into a lot of the traps of lesser making of books, but at times still do a noticeably better job than those books. And so you will get times when you do get some really great behind the scenes insight. As a huge fan of these movies, there was a ton of great little details that I really enjoyed finding out about. In fact, my personal favorite was the very first section of the book. It does something that even a lot of the best making of books neglect to do. It preps you with this really great runway of history before you get into the pre-production of the movie, to give you a really strong context to place the creation of this movie in. So not only does the first section talk about Disney pirate movies, it talks about pirate movies in general, and then pirates in pop culture and history in general. And from there it moves into the earliest kernels of ideas for the movie. And as a fan, that was really great. There's maybe like a paragraph where they talk about the very earliest sort of conception of what the movie was going to be, which doesn't really bear much resemblance to the movie we know, but that's really great to see how the idea evolved, and then how Jerry Bruckheimer was brought on, and then Gore Verbinski and the screenwriters, and you're getting a really great insight into the evolution of the creative process for these movies. And so the text was written by Michael Singer, who has written a ton of making of and movie related books, to be honest, none of which are very good, but I believe that by trade he is a unit publicist, and that really shows in his books, especially this one, where at times it kind of reads a bit like a press release, like he's trying to sell you on the movie, and it's like, yeah, I've already seen the movie, that's why I'm here. And it also features some of the most unbearable sort of fawning over the cast and crew that I've ever seen in any making of book. He would have you believe that every cast member, every crew member is the most perfect person for their role, is the greatest talent of their generation. And whether or not that's true, the over-the-top platitudes just sort of become tedious and a little embarrassing at times, because it's like you assume that this book is being written by the perspective of someone within the production, in which case it's sort of like giving yourself and your friends a giant pat on the back and like look how awesome we all are and look at this awesome movie. Or it's written by someone from the outside who just sounds like some sort of snivelling sycophant, which may actually work because Michael Singer has also done a couple of other books for Jerry Bruckheimer's movies since then. So, I never like speaking too harshly about the authors for these sort of books because oftentimes they are very, very restricted by time and money and resources and editors and corporate mandates and such like. But anyway, all that aside, ultimately I do think this book has its hits and its misses, but I think if you're a big fan of these movies and you can approach this book without expecting too much, then I would absolutely not hesitate to recommend it, because I know as a big fan of these movies, I found that the times when the book did hit the mark to make this a really enjoyable read.